When you think of it realistically, with any sort of logic behind it, maturity is not much more than a role playing game. Maturity in and of itself could be defined as a form of immaturity that it would already identify. It's somewhat childish to actually think in terms of maturity versus immaturity. There is such a thing as maturation, which is more so to do with learning about social responsibilities and adhering to those properly. That would be a sign of maturation. But, that's sort of like a pasteurization process, like where it's actually taking the maturity out of the situation, where what was once considered immaturity for you is now acceptable under these certain circumstances, and what was considered maturity for you at that one point is now something to be contemplated on. It's something to be, less gung ho about. So your prioritization shifts quite differently upon true maturation, where maturity doesn't mean anything, and immaturity is immaterial in the form of, passing any coherent judgment upon it. So long as a person is falling into line with their social responsibilities, then, no harm is being done if the person is acting out of their maturity, or outside of their maturity, I should say, to just be more clear on that. But, like, you might think, like, well, what about like a person who's like acting like a total clown? Like, what about the clown in class? Like, well, for one, uh, that's, potentially childlike understanding of things, for one. Like, if you're in a classroom setting, the like you're in a learning state of mind, like, no matter what age you are in a classroom setting, you're in a learning state of mind. You are the student. That is like a child and adult relationship between the student and the teacher. So, if you're the classroom clown, then, you're not, you're infringing on the social values of the environment you're in like you're kind of tainting the atmosphere, so to speak. And so, you know, if, if you're like, and this doesn't have to do with any sign of maturity or immaturity. This has to do with social boundaries being crossed. And so, like, but, that doesn't mean to be a clown in any given situation is a sign of immaturity. It and like it can actually be a sign of maturity. Like look at a jester in the king's court. Like they acted like a fool for the entertainment of others, but what they portrayed as the fool was a metaphor for the state of the condition that the kingdom was in. Like the jester was actually a part of the king's council. And so, if you think about things that way, there is wisdom to be derived from just about any source. It just needs to be at a given time that is suitable for that source, and so, where maturity and immaturity comes in with that is sort of, a childish perspective, of things, like, it's truly just developmental, and so you can actually greatly speed up the maturation process of any given individual given the right social cues. You can speed them up to the correct pace, and then they'll have caught up with themselves in a different way than usual, perhaps we'll say, and then they can look at things from a fresh perspective. Like so, the brink that I would take maturity to is learning to be able to positively aspect things into a fresh perspective. And like the brink that I would take immaturity to is the inability to aspect things into a fresh perspective. Like all of this on a positive level. Like if you're unable to positively aspect something into a fresh perspective, then that's the limit that I would take immaturity to. And on the flip side of that, like being able to positively do so would be the limit that I would take maturity to. And either of those is setting the lowest bar in a way also. So it's both the limit and the the it's the maximum and the minimum at the same time. Like, so, it's sort of a what's the right word? Like it cancels itself out, like to call it out on somebody. Like either one cancels out the other. Sort of like the phrase, I believe this is biblical teachings actually, but he who calls a man a fool is a fool himself. Like, so if you're like, oh, that person's so immature, like you're acting out of an immaturity to even mention it, like, and like the same way would go for like, oh, well, that person is more mature. Like, it's an internal bias, and so, like in and of itself, it kind of cancels out the concept of maturity. It doesn't necessarily make the person immature, but it sort of cancels out the concept of maturity at that point in time, and there's more room for growth of said immaturity, and so, all of this is just to say that, we have our, like, our moral limits, like we come to different conclusions about things in different ways, and the different ways we come to the different conclusions of things adjust our physical patterning, like in and of themselves, like, so, nobody can be trusted to be any one certain way. You can't have a totalitarian landscape as such, without, being overrun by somebody eventually. Like it would be like being trampled in a crowd at some point. Like nobody would have a mind for their own, and so, there are those of us who have been like blessed with maturity, and there are those of us who have been blessed with immaturity, and like it's room for growth in either direction, like, and it's a story to be told in either direction, and none of it is inherently good or bad in the end, aside from the situational awareness of it, like it doesn't fall on you personally, like outside of very stringent social responsibilities, like, and you can't breach those boundaries, like you just can't. So, like there's just a wall that you hit constantly on this quest for maturity, like that keeps on bringing you back around to the part of you that feels like it's immaturity until you reach true maturation where maturity means nothing to anybody. And so, psychologically speaking, I feel this is accurate. And philosophically speaking, I feel that it holds water. And, like educationally speaking, like on a sociological level, I think that this is valuable insight. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment, and share the channel.